Hi, my name is Jeanette, and I want to thank you for joining me on the channel Jane Reads. So today we are going to talk about my favorite reads of 2022. So in my stats video, I said that I read 109 books for the year. And out of those 109 books, 26 of them were 5-star reads. Now, out of those 26, 15 of them were new reads, like my first time reading through, and 11 of them were rereads for me. Okay, so I've narrowed down the 15 new reads to my top 10. Now, they're not really in any, they're in an order, but they're not in the order of like my favorite to my least favorite of those top 10. And then I'm going to talk about my top 8 out of the 11 rereads. Again, they're not in an order of my favorite reread to my least favorite reread or anything like that. Once I get talking about them, I'll explain the order I decided to share them. Sorry. So I'm going to be talking about 18 books in this video. Now, I promised my friend Christine, who edits my video, that I will only talk 1 minute about each book to keep this video short and sweet, and I say this is my favorite book. Now, I'm not going to just say this is my favorite, read it, because I'll give you a little bit more about it. So it might be a little bit over a minute, but when we were talking about it, I said, well, I'll do the minute, and she's like, okay, I'll just cut off the video in a minute, you keep going, well, too bad. And I'm like, so I don't think she'll be that ruthless, but I'm going to try to condense my thoughts so that this video is not really long for you. Okay, so 18 books. So my top 10, my first time reading through. When I did my stats video, my top genre for first time reads was contemporary romance. So I'm going to start with my favorite contemporary romance books. And the first one I'm going to mention is Say It's for Good by Teresa Tysinger. So this is book number 4 of her Laurel Cove romance series. It is a second chance and a fake dating trope. And I fell in love with these characters, and it was so nice, and I'd read the whole series, so it was nice to revisit the town. Okay? So, book number 2 is Providence by Carla Lorando. It is another contemporary romance. It focuses on Kendall, who grew up in a foster home, but then suddenly inherits a property in Colorado from a grandmother that she knew absolutely nothing about. She was currently living in California, so she went to Colorado to see this property and with plans to just sell it. She meets Gabe, who tries to convince her otherwise. Then they begin researching her family and how did this grandmother know about her, but she still grew up in a foster home, and all these questions arise. I just love these characters, and the faith that was shared with Kendall was just so heartwarming. Okay. Book number 3. Now we're moving into what I consider my favorite genre, and that is romantic suspense. Okay, so this was my second top genre that I read. And it is the one that I have the most favorites from, which doesn't really shock me when I looked at it. Okay, so I'm going back to one of my very early reads of the year, and that is Acceptable Risk by Lynette Eason. This is book number 2 of the Danger Never Sleeps series. The action didn't stop. Once it started, it was just, I was on the edge of my seat the whole way through this book, needing to know what was going to happen. And I just fell in love with the characters, both like the main characters and kind of the secondary character, but the secondary character didn't pull me away from the main characters. I really cared about all the characters in this story. And even in the midst of some very tense situations, I was laughing because there was just moments of comedy included, and comments that just kind of lighten the moments, and I loved this book. It was my favorite book of this series. I did do a full series review about this, so I will link any of these kind of videos any videos that I have about any of these books I'm mentioning, I will link them below. Book number 4 is Lethal Cover-Up by Darlene L. Turner. So I borrowed this book from a friend, so I don't have the physical copy, and it is another action-packed story. I thought I knew who the villain was, but then stuff happened that had me questioning, well, maybe it wasn't that person, and then maybe it was this person, but then something else happened. Well, no, it can't be that person. I should have stuck to my original gut because my original guess was right, but that's just the way it was. And I loved that this book was set in Canada because Darlene is a Canadian author and I'm Canadian, so that's just, it's nice to read books that are kind of set in my own country and that I can really picture because I've been around that area where it's been set. Okay, and book number 5 is Life Flight by Lynette Eason. This is book number 1 of her Extreme Measures series. And Penny is a life flight helicopter pilot who gets caught in the midst of a storm and her helicopter needs to land. So she does an emergency landing on the top of a mountain in the midst of this storm. Unknown to her, though, there is a serial killer on the run in this area, and she gets caught in the crosshairs trying to save the patient that the paramedics are working with and kind of find help because they're on this mountain. And the FBI is searching for the serial killer. I was on the edge of my seat, needing to know. And I just absolutely loved these characters. Penny, the strength and determination of her, yeah. Read it. Okay, book number 6 is another book by Darlene L. Turner, and it is Fatal Forensic Investigation. This one is set on Vancouver Island. It is another serial killer story. And again, so much happens with so much suspense and innocent people dying. And it's like, can they stop this guy before anybody else dies? I loved the way this story progressed, and it really built up for the next book. But the story ends in this book. It just kind of introduces the next characters that's going to. I have not read the next book yet, but I'm holding out for it. I'm not holding out. My friend is currently reading it and then it's going to loan it to me so that I can read it. Okay, so the next book I actually have a physical copy of. It is Point of Danger by Irene Hannon. This is book number 1 of her Triple Threat series. So this one, I was going to say it's another serial killer, but it's not. So Eve's life, who is a radio show host, is being threatened, and she has no idea why somebody has targeted her. I loved that she worked with the police and listened to the police's advice. Wow, that's hard to say. The police's advice. Listened to the advice from the police and didn't try to catch the guy on her own. And the characters, again, I just fell in love with. And I was really shocked by the ending and who kind of the mastermind behind everything was. I love suspense-filled books that just keep me on the edge of my seat. Then the next book is book number 3 of that same series, The Triple Threat by Irene Hannon, and that is Body of Evidence. So this one, again, I just kept guessing the whole way through. And I loved that the main character is a forensic pathologist who is doing an autopsy on somebody and comes across something that's kind of a little unusual. And it's like, I've seen this before. And then she goes to investigate another autopsy, kind of pulls up results from another autopsy that she'd done a couple months ago. And something that was ruled as natural causes, now it's come up in twice. I'm like, that can't be. So she begins working with a local sheriff to try to figure it out. I just love these characters, and the suspense and the romance just was very well balanced. And again, I was guessing of who was behind it. So, the book number 9 is, we're moving into historical fiction now. So, book number 9 is A Distant Melody by Sarah Sundin. This was the first book that I have ever read by Sarah Sundin, and it wasn't the last of the year. This is book number 1 of her Wings of Glory series. And it is set in the beginning of World War II. And Allie and Walt meet at a mutual friend's wedding. And then Walt has to go off to war. And Allie is engaged to be married to somebody that her father has kind of kind of an arranged marriage almost. But Walt and Allie continue communicating via letters. And then things just develop, and can Allie kind of make a decision? Does she listen to her father, or does she listen to her heart? I just loved these characters, and the story, and the way the writing just pulled me in. And I absolutely loved reading the letters that were sent between the two of them. And yeah. And book number 10 is Until Leaves Fall in Paris by Sarah Sundin. As I said, the last book wasn't my last Sarah Sundin book. So I read 4. This is the second one that I'm mentioning here. So this one is set in the start of World War II in Paris. And we meet 2 characters who are staying in Paris, who are both American, and they're staying in Paris for different reasons. I fell in love with these characters, and getting to know getting to see how the resistance worked against the Nazis, and kind of the determination of them and the strength of them. And wow, like, so emotional. I love this book. That's really all I'm going to say. So those are the top 10 books for my first time reading. Now I'm going to switch over to my top 8 books that I reread this year. So number 1 is a romantic suspense, and it is Don't Look Back by Lynette Eason. This is book number 2 of the Women of Justice series. This was my second time reading this, and I just love the character of Jamie. She is a forensic pathologist who has really stuck to her home and does not leave her house alone for the last 12 years because of traumatic events. She was kidnapped as a child, and now she's starting to venture out and kind of becoming more courageous. And now it appears that her kidnapper is back. And can she overcome that fear? And can the kidnapper be caught once and for all? I just love it. I loved it and was on the edge of my seat. Okay, then book number 2 is a historical romance. I have talked about this a lot, so I'm really not going to say much about it. It is called The Christmas Bargain by Shanna Hatfield. It is 2 strangers marrying and falling in love. Just such sweet, warm story, cozy read for me. I just love it. Okay, book number 3 is No Ocean Too Wide by Carrie Ternasky. It is another historical romance. This one begins in England in the early 1900s, and then it comes over to Canada where the rest of the story kind of continues. I didn't really know much about how British children were sent across the ocean to Canada until I read this book. And wow, the way that they were dealt with and treated, just because their families did not really have money, like, so heart-wrenching. And I love this story. And it is a duology, so there is a book number 2 that kind of picks up where this one left off. If you haven't read it, please give it a go. Okay, number 4 is The Wedding Chapel by Rachel Hawke. This is a dual timeline, and it features 4 main characters. So there is a young married couple, newlyweds, and then there are 2 seniors who were once sweethearts but are not together. I think they're both in their 80s in the contemporary timeline, or the present day timeline. And so it features 2 timelines, 1948 and 2015, I think is kind of when it was written. The story is told from 4 points of view, which I absolutely loved, following and kind of switching and getting each character's perspective. But I know that some people do not like that, but I just loved it. And kind of learning the history, and it was really, like, I loved the young couple, but I really loved the older characters, especially this, like, Jimmy, the older man. Just, yeah. This was my second time reading it, and I loved it just as much as I did the first time. Book number 5 is Someplace Familiar by Teresa Tysinger. So this is book 1 of the Laurel Cove series. So I mentioned book 4 in my first time read through. So because I was reading that for the first time, I reread this one. So this was my second time reading this one. It introduces you to the town and the characters of Laurel Cove. And the main characters in this one are Jack and Livy, who once knew each other as kids when Jack grew up in Laurel Cove and still lives there, and Livy's family came and she spent a summer there. So Livy and Jack, when they were kids, they spent a summer playing together. Then Livy went back to kind of non-vacation life, and they haven't seen each other for years. And now she comes back to town and they reconnect as adults. And the story builds from there. And they both have past that they are dealing with and trying to overcome. And the way the characters connect, and then the town, like Jack's friends, accept Livy and welcome her and make her feel like one of the group of friends. I loved it, and how else do I say it? I love this book. There's a reason it's on my favorites list, and there's a reason I reread it. So then, book number 6 is 5 Days in Sky by Carlo Lorando. Again, this is another author kind of that I've read a few from. This was my third time reading this book. It is set in Scotland, and it's so easy to picture the setting and like kind of transport yourself there because the descriptions is so well done. So we follow Andrea, who is a hotel consultant, and James, who is a chef who also owns a hotel with his brother, and they bring in Andrea to help build up the hotel and kind of get it established. The way the characters connected, and they kept the relationship professional at times, but then there was also flirty moments and sarcastic comments made and just fun. And I just loved the way they kind of brought out the best in each other and then challenged each other. And it's another just cozy read for me. Again, it's a contemporary romance, so if you are into romance, please give this book a try. So now, book number 7 is Kept by Sally Bradley. It is another contemporary romance, and this was my second time reading it. And all the characters have flaws in this book. So there is Mishka, who is not a Christian and is living a lifestyle that many may judge her for and look down on her for. Then there is Dylan, who is a youth pastor who is struggling with different things. And Dylan moves into the apartment next door to Mishka with his brother. And then his brother is engaged to Tracy. And so kind of the 4 characters all meet through various events kind of in the hallway of the apartment building. And what I loved about this book is Tracy really befriended Mishka and showed her God's love and taught her about God. And it's a huge coming to faith story. And what I really liked is Tracy is dealing with her own issues. And she could have had whatever happened with her and just kind of completely avoided Mishka because Mishka lived next door to the brothers. But she didn't. She really befriended Mishka, and through her struggles, still kind of went out and really showed Mishka. And that's what I love about this story. It deals with a very difficult subject and kind of not a great lifestyle, but transporting and using that to still show God's love through it. Okay, the last book I'm going to talk about is It Had to Be You by Susan May Warren. This is another contemporary romance. This was my third time reading this story, and I loved it just as much as I did the first and second time. And it is book number 2 of the Christensen Family series. So I just very recently talked about this because I read it in December. And it focuses on Eden, who is the eldest girl of the Christensens. So she's the second oldest of the siblings. And she is living in Minneapolis. And her brother, she's kind of like the caretaker, guardian of her brother who gets injured. So she is in the hospital and she meets this Jane Doe, or I always want to say Jane Doe, it's John Doe. She comes across this John Doe and becomes very like curious about his background, and this guy is lying in a coma by himself, like she doesn't feel that's right. So she begins investigating, kind of finding out answers for this John Doe. Meanwhile, she has a romance blooming, and it's just I loved following, and I think because it had a bit of a mystery in it is probably why I really liked it. And then the second storyline is Sam, who is dealing with health challenges with his daughter, and his storyline is so heartbreaking. And it was like, oh, like, yeah, it was hard to read, but because of that, I cared so much about it that I did not want to put this book down. So those are my top 18 books for 2022. Now, did I keep to the minute per book? Probably not. But hopefully this is not too long and too overwhelming for you. But if you have any questions about any of these books, I'd love to chat in the comments below. And I want to thank you for joining me today and taking the time to watch this video. And I would love it if you would like and subscribe to my channel. Have a good day. Bye.